I remember a Tuesday night pretty clearly. Nothing special about it. I'd been home maybe 20 minutes, shoes still on, just sitting there staring at nothing. Not exhausted, just drained in that quiet way where the day didn't take everything, but it didn't leave much either. My phone buzzed. Someone suggested grabbing food. I didn't think about money at all. I thought about not cooking, not deciding, not sitting alone with that flat feeling. $15 felt like nothing in that moment. It wasn't spending. It felt like relief, like borrowing a little energy from the outside world. At the time, I told myself it was harmless, just food, just people. What I didn't notice was how often I started making that trade. How often social plans quietly replaced rest. How money slipped in without asking permission, just riding along with the invite. For a long time, I treated social spending like it didn't count the same. Drinks were just drinks. Dinner was just dinner. That was life. Everyone did it. I wasn't buying stupid stuff. I wasn't reckless. But somewhere along the way, every yes started carrying a small, invisible receipt. I didn't feel excited going out. I just felt obligated to keep moving. Checking my balance before answering felt awkward, almost rude, so I stopped doing it. I told myself I'd figure it out later, that this was just a phase. What I didn't admit was how tired I was of being the one who hesitated, of explaining why I couldn't make it. Spending became the easier option, not the happier one, just the quieter one. There was a stretch where most of my spending wasn't about fun at all. It was about momentum. Once I was out, everything stacked. One drink became two because leaving felt abrupt. Food followed because it was late and everyone was hungry. A rideshare showed up because walking felt like work. None of it felt like a decision. It felt like gravity. I remember looking back at a month and realizing how little of it stood out. No big nights, no wild stories, just a blur of small charges tied to might as well. That was the unsettling part. I wasn't splurging. I was maintaining, paying to stay in motion, paying to avoid the moment where I'd have to say, actually, I'm done. That avoidance didn't feel dramatic. It felt polite. And it cost me more than I noticed. I started noticing how rarely social plans happened when I still had energy. Everything landed at night, after work, after traffic, after my brain was already cooked. That mattered more than I realized. Late decisions cost more, not just money, clarity. A $22 dinner at lunchtime feels different than the same dinner at 8:45 when you're too tired to argue with yourself. At night, my resistance drops. I don't weigh options, I default. I didn't think of it as a pattern at the time. I thought I was just being easygoing. But there's a quiet tax on decisions made when you're worn down. I paid it repeatedly. And because it was tied to people, not objects, it felt harder to question. Like examining the cost meant examining the relationship. I had a rule in my head that social spending was somehow exempt. It wasn't impulse buying. It wasn't waste. It was connection. That framing protected it from scrutiny. I'd hesitate on buying something for myself, but I wouldn't blink at a $60 tab split 5 ways, even on nights where I barely talked. Even when I came home feeling exactly the same, one month I added it up, just out of curiosity. Social stuff passed $400. $400 wasn't nothing. That was groceries, that was margin, and I couldn't remember what I'd gotten from it. Not in a dramatic way, just a dull realization that the money left faster than the feeling stayed. That pause, that quiet, stuck with me longer than I expected. There's a strange social math we don't really say out loud. The cost of being included versus the cost of opting out. I always assumed opting out was the expensive one emotionally, but financially it was the opposite. Still, I kept paying. $14 here, $18 there. Add a $25 rideshare and suddenly a quick hang is $60. Do that twice a week and you're at $480 a month. I didn't run those numbers at first. I didn't want to. Because once you see them, they don't unsee themselves. That was the part I didn't want to look at. Not because the spending was outrageous, but because it was reasonable enough to justify and heavy enough to matter. I noticed how rarely I suggested anything that didn't cost money. Walks, coffee at home, sitting somewhere quiet. Not because I didn't like those things, because they felt like downgrades, like I was asking people to accept less. That assumption lived entirely in my head. No one ever said it, but it shaped my choices anyway. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I just didn't want to be the one who made plans smaller. So I kept choosing options that matched the energy I thought I was supposed to have, and paying for it. Literally. That gap between what I actually wanted and what I paid for stayed subtle, but it wore on me in this low, persistent way. There's also the guilt spending, the kind that shows up after you cancel once or twice. You feel like you owe the next yes. So when it comes, you overcommit. Bigger place, longer night, more rounds. I've done that more times than I want to admit. It felt like catching up, like proving I was still in it. Money doesn't understand intention, though. It just leaves. Later, when I check my account, I'd feel this quiet resentment, not toward anyone else, but toward myself. I agreed to something I didn't actually want, then paid to feel drained. That loop was hard to name because it didn't look reckless. It looked social, normal, responsible even, until it didn't. I started noticing how often I paid extra just to avoid friction, covering around so we wouldn't split, upgrading delivery so it'd be faster, saying, I'll get this one, because calculating felt awkward. Those moments looked generous, and sometimes they were, but sometimes they were just exhaustion spending. Spending to keep things smooth. Spending to avoid a pause. Over a year, those gestures added up to hundreds, maybe more. And I don't think they made me feel closer to anyone. They just made interactions easier in the moment. That's when it clicked for me. Convenience doesn't just cost money, it costs awareness. And once awareness slips, the spending becomes invisible. That's when it really settles in. For a while, my credit card became a social buffer. I didn't think of it that way then. It just made everything easier. No immediate consequence, no decision point. Swipe now, think later. Except later kept showing up with interest attached. One night, I added up just the interest from a few months of carrying social spending. It was around $70. $70 for nothing tangible, no memory, no object. Just the cost of delaying a decision. That number bothered me more than the balance, because it wasn't about excess, it was about avoidance. I delayed saying no, delayed checking in with myself, and I paid for that delay quietly, month after month. I always thought I was good with money because I wasn't flashy. No luxury purchases, no wild nights. But this kind of spending hides in plain sight. It blends in with life. That's what made it uncomfortable to confront. Admitting it mattered meant admitting I wasn't as intentional as I believed. That stung a little. I wasn't careless, I was agreeable. And agreeable spending feels virtuous until the numbers tell a different story. I remember scrolling through a statement late one night and feeling this low-grade fatigue. Not panic, not shame. Just, oh, this again. That feeling didn't push me to change anything immediately. It just sat there waiting. There's a difference between choosing to spend and drifting into it. I drifted a lot, especially when plans stacked up. Thursday drinks, Friday dinner, Saturday something else. Each one felt fine. Together, they swallowed the week and the paycheck. One month, I realized nearly half my discretionary spending was tied to other people's schedules, not my own wants. That realization didn't feel empowering. It felt hollow. Like I'd outsourced my money decisions without noticing. No one forced me. That's the tricky part. I agreed every time. But agreement isn't the same as intention. That gap between saying yes and meaning yes was where the money kept slipping through. I don't think we talk enough about how loneliness and spending overlap. Not dramatically. In a quiet, weekday way. When staying in feels heavier than spending $30 you didn't plan on. I've made that trade more times than I can count. Sometimes it was worth it, sometimes it wasn't. The problem was I stopped distinguishing between the two. Spending became the default response to feeling disconnected. Over time, that adds up. If you spend $25 twice a week just to avoid being alone, that's $2,600 a year. Saying that number out loud made me uncomfortable. Because the number isn't the point. The pattern is. And once I saw the pattern, I couldn't pretend it was random anymore. I noticed how often I felt relieved when plans were canceled. That confused me. Relief shouldn't feel like loss avoidance, but there it was. Relief meant rest. It meant no spending. It meant a quiet night that didn't cost anything. That contradiction stuck with me. If I wanted these plans so much, why did I feel lighter when they disappeared? I didn't have a clean answer. Just a growing sense that I was saying yes out of habit, not desire. And habits are expensive when you don't look at them, especially social ones. They're wrapped in good intentions. You don't question them easily, you just keep going until the mismatch becomes obvious. A friend once joked about how expensive just hanging out had become. Everyone laughed. I laughed too, but it landed heavier than I expected. Because it wasn't a joke to my budget, it was a line item. Several. I thought about how often I budgeted for fun, but not for recovery. The spending wasn't just money, it was energy. And when both were low, I felt stretched thin in this vague, persistent way. Not broke, just worn. That state doesn't trigger alarms. It hums in the background. And the hum gets louder when you realize how much of it is self-inflicted, even if unintentionally. I don't regret the people. I regret how little I noticed myself. I was there physically, but absent internally. Spending filled that gap for a while. It made things feel active, social, alive. But it didn't fix the fatigue underneath. It postponed it, financially and emotionally. One night, I did a simple calculation. If I redirected $200 a month from social spending, that's $2,400 a year. That number wasn't exciting. It was grounding. It represented options, breathing room. Realizing I'd been trading that for nights I barely remembered felt quietly disappointing. Not devastating, just enough to make me pause mid-thought and trail off. There's a subtle pressure to keep up, even when no one is pushing. You feel it in group chats, in photos, in stories you weren't part of. Spending becomes the ticket back in. I bought that ticket without checking the price, more than once. And no one ever asked me to. That's what makes it complicated. The pressure was internal. The cost was external. I carried it alone. Looking back, I can see how easily that repeats. Especially in your 30s when time feels scarce. Money steps in to compress connection into paid moments. That works for a while. Until it doesn't. I started paying attention to how often I said, "It's fine," without thinking. That phrase covered a lot. It's fine meant I didn't want to explain. It's fine meant I didn't want to be difficult. It's fine meant I'd deal with it later. Financially, later arrives all at once. One year, I added up a year of it's fine spending. It crossed $3,000. Seeing that number didn't make me angry. It made me tired because it represented effort. Hours worked, time traded, and I hadn't been fully awake for most of those decisions. That realization lingered longer than I expected. What bothered me most wasn't the money. It was how quietly it left. No drama, no regret in the moment, just steady erosion. Social spending felt justified because it was shared. But the impact wasn't shared. It showed up alone on my statements late at night. I don't think I was irresponsible. I think I was distracted, and distraction is expensive over time, especially when it's fueled by wanting to belong, to relax, to not think. Those wants are human. I still have them. I just see them differently now, not as flaws, as signals. Signals that cost money when you ignore them. Sometimes I picture all those small charges as quiet evenings I could have bought back. Not dramatically, just a little more space, a little less pressure. The strange thing about social energy turning into spending is how invisible it feels while it's happening. You don't feel like you're making money decisions, you feel like you're just living. And maybe that's the hardest part, because living shouldn't feel like a leak. I don't have a clean ending for this, just an image that sticks with me. Sitting at home, lights low, phone face down, realizing that not going out didn't cost me anything, and somehow that felt heavier and lighter at the same time.